Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we are joined by an extremely successful entrepreneur. Be one way to introduce this gentleman. He has written a book called Setting the Table. The subtitle, The Transforming Power of Hospitality in Business. He is Danny Meyer. His publisher is HarperCollins. Now, I need to identify this man for you, since some of you probably don't know. He has a few restaurants, like 10. Well, 10 restaurants and
7 restaurants.
7 restaurants.
And a jazz club and a catering company and some cafes at the Museum of Modern Art.
Well, there's more than cafes. There's also a really
one
big
of them,
restaurant.
Right, the Modern is a restaurant. That's
all right, let me
sure.
read off your establishments. It's right here. Union Square Cafe, that was numero uno, right? Gramercy Tavern, 11 Madison Park, Tabla. Did I say that right?
You said it perfectly.
Thank you very much. Blue Smoke, that's, where you get your
barbecue. And
Jazz Standard, that's the club. And this is my favorite, the Shake Shack.
Have you been to the Shake Shack?
No, but you've left no stone unturned.
I have definitely devolved from glorious white tablecloth into burgers and frozen custard.
And then there is, and these 3 are all in the Museum of Modern Art, just recently returned to its original headquarters. The Modern, which is the main large restaurant, Cafe 2, Terrace 5. And then on days that he has nothing else to do, he runs a catering operation called the Hudson Yards Catering. Now, to do all this, you have not a board of directors, I don't think you call it that, but you talk about in an article in Fortune about your key folks getting together every Tuesday morning, and you spend 90% of your time talking about how things are going, how the operations are going, and then the rest of the time contemplating our next move. And that's the way we do it.
That's the way we do it. It's critical today, just as it's been critical forever, for a guest when they come to a restaurant that they feel a sense of ownership. In the last 20 years since I've been in this business, you've all seen it out here in San Francisco, and we see it across the country. Restaurant groups have developed. It used to be that there would be one guy living upstairs, and if he wanted the day off or she wanted the day off, you closed the restaurant.
Yelling at his wife and children, yes.
So now we rely on a team of people, and in each one of my restaurants back in New York, there is an owner on premise, often the chef or the general manager. But I've also learned that the only way to grow properly is to surround myself with people who can compensate for my weaknesses with their strengths.
One of the things mentioned in this article, which I think is really a major part of your style, and that is that you meet with new employees once every 4 weeks?
Every 4 weeks.
And what do you do?
Well, I think that the first job I ever had where I was a boss was in 1980. And I was running John Anderson's Cook County presidential campaign in Chicago. I had 20 people reporting to me. I was 22 years old. Not one of them got a paycheck. They were all volunteers. And I learned one of the most important business lessons at that point, which was this.
You were pulling the big bucks. What were you pulling?
I was making about $214 a week. And thank God he got 7.5% of the presidential vote, or I wouldn't have got my last paycheck. But I learned an important business lesson back then, which is that I still treat my employees as if they are volunteers. Does that mean they don't get a paycheck? Of course not. They get a paycheck. But people don't come to work for you just for the money. They come because they want to believe in something far greater. And all I had at my disposal when I was at John Anderson's campaign was to motivate people by saying, we share these beliefs in common. It's worth your while to work hard. So that helped me to establish my own philosophy as a businessman and to give people something to come to work for far beyond just their paycheck.
Another part of your style, and this began when you were a kid in grade school, is using food to get to know people. You talk about trading your liverwurst or your Braunschweiger for peanut butter and jelly and so on, and also got into the deep problem of Hellmann's versus Miracle Whip. And then, of course, later on, when you're really getting into food and thinking about it, you're traveling to all parts of this country and Europe, and you do the same thing.
Yeah, for some strange reason, I'm one of these people who finds it easier to learn about people based on what they eat than almost anything else. And I do that wherever I travel. I've been in San Francisco for about 16 hours, and I have already managed to stick my nose into 4 different places to eat, maybe even more so far. And that's without even having had time for breakfast or lunch. I just had one of the greatest coffees I've had in the entire world.
Where?
At Blue Bottle Coffee.
All right. I don't even know that place.
It is awesome.
You see, now you're teaching me. Well, look, Setting the Table talks about many important places that are part of the New York restaurant scene. That's one of the other things it does. And one of the places that you've probably not heard of until now is called Pesca. We'll find out why Pesca is so important when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Danny Meyer is the guest. His book is called Setting the Table, The Transforming Power of Hospitality in Business. And somebody who's pretty much a fair country guy wrote a book himself, did a little news reporting, Tom Brokaw. He has very nice things to say about setting the table. It's the next best thing to having a meal at one of Danny Meyer's restaurants. It takes you inside the demanding and exciting world of fine dining in the world's greatest city. Oh, come on. And your guide is a peerless restaurateur and all-around good guy. Well, aside from, the best city in the world, that's a very good evaluation of the book.
Believe everything Tom Brokaw says? Well, I don't think you should. He's a good guy himself.
I need to get into Pesca because that's not a restaurant name that's dropped often out here on the left coast.
Do you know the restaurant?
Never heard.
Or did you? Pesca was my first job.
I know it was your first job.
Enormously influential. This was back in 1984, and it was actually owned by a San Franciscan by the name of Eugene Fracchia. And I would say that Eugene's style of bringing a Cal-Ital approach to seafood was my first introduction to why the West Coast was just where the great food was in this country. We were taking our influences in New York mostly from Europe, mostly from France and Italy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my first restaurant, Union Square Cafe, was truly a blend of what I had learned when I was living in France and Italy and the kinds of influences that I had from San Francisco.
But the point that I think has to be made, because I think sometimes people get the idea that somebody who's as successful as you are at what you do, started right at the top. What were you doing at Pesca?
Well, I gave myself a promotion. Instead of taking a $214 a week job as a political dude, I got a $250 a week job as an assistant day manager. And I would come into work every day with my corduroys and wallabies. And my job was to take reservations, to type the specials, to run down the street and get them Xeroxed, stick them in a Lucite container, answer people's questions, and host lunch. And I had the time of my life.
Yeah, and for this, you'd given up a $125,000 a year job.
I was a top salesman for a company that sold electronic tags to stop shoplifters, of all things. And it was a great experience. It gave me a lot of self-confidence. I got to know the contours of New York City, especially the bad neighborhoods with the most shoplifting. But what I couldn't get out of my mind the whole time was how much I loved food. And I was so hard up to find restaurants that I would actually plan my sales calls based on where the best restaurant was. Even if it was something like Popeye's Fried Chicken, that's where my sales calls would be.
I like that approach. I really like that approach. One of the things, the decisions that you made early on as you were thinking about getting into this business, that you would not be a chef. You fired yourself as chef, I think is the way you put it in the book.
I've always loved cooking, and to this day I love cooking. Back in the mid-1980s, it was not considered a valid career choice to parlay a liberal arts degree into going into the restaurant business. And I did have parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles to answer to. And the only way that they all sort of gave me their permission, even though it was don't ask, don't tell, as far as my career choice, was if I said I'm going to go be a chef. They would never have said it was okay to go be a restaurateur.
Okay.
So I got myself trained in Italy and France. And it was while I was there that not only did I fall in love with chefdom, but I also really developed a huge respect for what it takes in terms of the depth that people have to apply if they want to be a great chef. So I came back, and literally it was not until weeks before I opened Union Square Cafe that I finally acknowledged to myself, if you want this thing to be successful, you better find a guy who can really
get out
cook.
of the kitchen.
All that said, I wouldn't trade in the time I had plucking feathers out of birds and opening oysters and chopping shallots for anything. I learned about how to shop at the market, and I became conversant enough in being a great chef that it's allowed me to attract some great chefs through the years.
There are several ways in this book that you go, I suppose you could use the phrase, go against the grain. And one of them is saying that in picking a site for a restaurant, it isn't location. It's something else.
It's context. I think when you go to a restaurant, it's not that you're only going to go to a place because it's on a specific corner. You know, maybe that works for the fast food guys on interstate highways or something like that. But when I talk about context, what I mean is that the minute you get out of your car or the minute you walk into a door, the restaurant itself has to feel like a natural extension of wherever it is. And the example that I give in terms of context, imagine a Tiffany box. Mm-hmm. When you see that Tiffany box, that provides a context that almost tells you what's going to be inside. If you found a barbecue rib bone inside the Tiffany box, something doesn't fit. You expect it to be something very specific. And a neighborhood does that for restaurants.
When we come back, we're going to look at another one of those ways that Danny Meyer goes against the grain.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster talking to guest Danny Meyer about his new book, Setting the Table, The Transforming Power of Hospitality in Business. A political consultant you may have heard of, James Carville, has this to say about setting the table. In 1985, a 27-year-old from St. Louis came to New York with the absolutely naive and Pollyanna-ish idea that you could succeed in New York by, get this, being nice to people. Danny Meyer succeeded with the philosophy that many thought was doomed to fail. Here's a nice guy who didn't just finish first. He finished first in New York. Isn't that?
I don't think James Carville pronounces it New York.
No, well, I do, because I spent a lot of time there in my youth.
Yeah, you know, hospitality is the defining factor in any business's success today. We used to talk about service being the thing.
Yes.
That was a long time ago. Service, if you don't have an excellent product and you don't serve it to people, in other words, you don't deliver it what you say you're going to deliver, you don't even have a right to hang up your shingle today. Any company can do that. I think if you look at the companies that are doing well across the entire spectrum, well beyond just restaurants, it's the companies that understand it's how you make people feel.
Yeah.
And long after they forget how good your roast chicken is or isn't, they're going to remember how you made them feel. Yeah, because and that's hospitality.
That constitutes the experience, and it's the experience that they remember.
More than anything else.
Yeah, they won't know what the spices were in the chicken. It's the experience.
One of the things that dawned on me when I was writing the book was that when you are first born, literally within moments, you get 4 gifts, the greatest hospitality gifts of your entire life. An eye contact, a smile, a hug, and some decent food. And I don't think people stop looking for those things the rest of their lives. And hospitality is the hug.
It hasn't all been easy. When you opened the second restaurant called Gramercy Tavern, there came a crisis. And you were at your wit's end, tearing your hair out. Not that you have, well, you do have a lot of hair, but it's close cropped. It'd be hard to tear out. It says in the book you were tearing your hair out. And you decided that you then in a fighting mood and that you were going to really lay down the law. And you laid down the law, and the law that you laid down you have come to call Enlightened Hospitality.
I spent the first 2 years or so. It took me 10 years, Jim, to actually open a second restaurant.
That's right. It
was Union Square Cafe for almost a full decade.
You were scared about trying
I was completely convinced that I'd end up going down the same path my dad did in St. Louis growing up, where he went bankrupt a couple times when he expanded. And that's what I associated expansion with, was bankruptcy. So I did it. I went against my better judgment. And lo and behold, I realized that everything I had done as a manager for the first 10 years was based on my own intuition. And I led by example, but not with explicit instructions.
Yes.
And as soon as there were 2 restaurants, wherever I was not at the other place. And I kept going from problem to problem wherever I went, Union Square Cafe, Gramercy Tavern. And I finally decided I better tell people what's important to me. And I learned something very strange when I cocooned with a couple members of my team and a great consultant. And we learned that the most effective way to deliver customer satisfaction was to put our customers second. That if we put our own staff first...
Hold it a minute now.
Yeah.
The way to success in this business or any business is to put your customers second.
And the way to make the most money was to put our investors fifth, and to actually put our community and our suppliers even ahead of our own investors. And we ended up talking this thing through because it didn't even make sense to us. And we ended up giving it a name, which we called the virtuous cycle of enlightened hospitality. And what we learned was that if you hire the right kind of people with the right kind of emotional skills, which we call high HQ, high hospitality quotient.
I'll try to remember.
These are people who derive pleasure from the act of delivering pleasure. Mm-hmm. And if you really give them a great community of colleagues to work with, taking care of the guests becomes second nature. And then if you break down the walls of your business and extend the hospitality into the community, guess what? The community ends up rallying to the support of your business. If you take great care of your suppliers, you get great product. If you get great product and you got a big top line with happy customers and happy employees, guess what? You make good money. And every time you make good money, the investors line up to reinvest in your next project. When you do a new project, you take care of your employees again because you give them a chance to grow.
And you're right. The investors at that point, not that they ever were, are not investing in food. They're investing in something else, which you've just defined, a way of doing business.
And they're proud. And in addition to getting a financial return, they're proud to be affiliated with a brand that makes them feel good right down to the heart.
You foodies out there, you know that you have to get a book by Danny Meyer because he is such an important and innovative restaurateur. Those of you who, like me, would classify yourselves probably as non-foodies ought to get this book because it makes a heck of a lot of sense for your work life and your life. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.